Hello, everyone. My name is Isla Harrington. I always thought my 23rd birthday would mark a turning point. Just not like this. That morning, I woke up early to get ready for my weekend shift at Bluestone Cafe. I wasn't expecting balloons or cake. My family had a history of forgetting birthdays, especially mine. But I still checked my phone, hoping for maybe a message from Mom. Instead, there was a single text from my dad, sent at 6:02 a.m. Sold your tablet. Tessa needs a car. Be grateful we feed you. I stared at the screen. My chest tightened as if someone had yanked all the air out of my lungs. Surely I was misreading. This couldn't be real. But it was followed by another message. Also, transfer $7,500 for Tessa's tuition by Friday. She needs to stay enrolled. My hands shook. That tablet wasn't just any device. It was the high-end design tablet I'd saved for over a year to buy. It held all my projects, my final thesis, client work, portfolio drafts, my future. And they sold it without asking. For a car? I texted back 2 words. No chance. The reply came instantly. Then get out! You're cut off! Just like that. On my birthday. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just sat there, stunned. Then I packed my backpack with my essentials, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. Quietly. That morning, I arrived at Bluestone Cafe as if nothing had happened, smiled at the regulars, served iced lattes and vegan scones, and took every order with a nod. But inside, I was numb. I didn't even tell my manager, Valerie, who had once lent me her own raincoat during a snowstorm, what was going on. I just worked my shift, watching people laugh and sip their cappuccinos like it wasn't the worst day of my life. By noon, I couldn't hold it in any longer. During my break, I called Camille. Camille had been my best friend since sophomore year of high school. She once snuck me into her family's Thanksgiving dinner because she knew my own would forget. If anyone would understand, it was her. She didn't ask questions when I showed up at her apartment that evening with a duffel bag and puffy eyes. "Your dad did what?" she whispered after reading the texts. "They sold your tablet and want you to pay for Tessa's tuition? That's criminal." I tried to laugh. It came out hollow. "I guess I finally reached my expiration date," I murmured. Camille handed me tea and sat beside me on the couch. "No, Isla, you just reached your limit." That night, as I curled up on Camille's pull-out sofa, my brain wouldn't stop spinning. This wasn't the first time my needs had come second to Tessa's. When I turned 16, my party was canceled last minute. Tessa had a cold. When I got into RISD, my mom skipped my scholarship award ceremony because Tessa had a modeling callback. Even my high school laptop? Borrowed for Tessa's film class. It came back shattered and covered in stickers. But this, selling my property and demanding money for a 4th tuition attempt for someone who'd failed every program she started? This was too far. That's when the shift happened. That's when I realized I wasn't the problem. I was the plan, the reliable one, the fixer, the invisible safety net they never thanked. Not anymore. Have you ever felt like the backup plan in your own family? If you've been through something like this, or you're just rooting for Isla's next move, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe. This story is just getting started. I didn't sleep much that night. Even curled up on Camille's couch, wrapped in one of her oversized sweaters, and surrounded by the scent of cinnamon from the candle she always lit in the evenings. My mind wouldn't stop racing. I kept replaying that message from my father over and over. Sold your tablet. Tessa needs a car. Be grateful we feed you. It wasn't just the words. It was how normal he made it sound. As if selling something I had worked an entire year to save for, just to reward my sister again, was totally acceptable. As if I should smile and say thank you. It wasn't the first time they'd used gratitude as a weapon. I remember being 12, staying up late painting posters for a school art contest. My father walked in, took one look and said, "If you spent half that time doing something useful, we wouldn't have to keep buying your school supplies." I never told him those paints were a birthday gift from my aunt. But this time, it wasn't just an insult. It was theft. And worse, it was control. The message was clear. Everything you own is ours to take. Your boundaries are negotiable. Your future is dispensable. That realization broke something in me. But it also built something. By morning, a decision had taken root. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. I wasn't going to let them erase everything I'd built without ever having to look at what they'd done. Camille handed me a mug of coffee as I sat at her kitchen counter, scribbling in a notebook filled with timelines, account numbers, and receipts. Her voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." "I know," I said quietly, "but I have to do it." That afternoon, I started gathering everything I could remember. I logged into old banking apps, dug through email confirmations, tracked down the warranty on the tablet, and found folders of past transactions that made my stomach twist. It was all there. Years of withdrawals from my account labeled family emergencies that I never got back. Utility bills I'd paid just this once. Grocery costs that somehow landed on my debit card every month. The down payment I'd made for the new dishwasher last year because you use it too, Isla. Camille helped me scan and organize everything. At some point, she looked up from a stack of old statements and whispered, "You've basically been supporting them." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. We both knew it was true. I wasn't just a daughter. I'd been their invisible financial cushion, their built-in safety net, their backup plan. That night, I called my Aunt Laura. She was my dad's older sister, someone who had always sent me cards on holidays even when the rest of my family forgot. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but when I told her what happened, her voice dropped to a low, angry whisper. "He did what? Isla, this has been building for years. Your grandparents tried to talk to him about his favoritism, but he wouldn't hear it. But selling your property? Using your account like a piggy bank? That crosses every line." She didn't hesitate. "Whatever you decide to do, I've got your back." That phrase stuck with me. No one had said that to me in years. By 10 p.m., I had everything prepared: scanned documents, highlighted summaries, and a cover letter detailing my financial contributions to the household. I also included a copy of the police report I'd filed earlier that afternoon, not pressing charges yet, just documenting the theft of my property, just starting a record. Camille looked up as I zipped my backpack. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I'm done being the silent one," I replied. At 11:48 p.m., I pulled into the driveway of the house I no longer considered home. Only Tessa's bedroom light was on. I entered with my spare key. The house felt colder than I remembered. Upstairs, my bedroom door was ajar. Inside, I found Tessa standing in front of my mirror, wearing my interview blazer. My drawers were half open. Clothes were scattered everywhere. "Oh," she said, startled. "Didn't think you'd come back. Dad said I could take some stuff since you're leaving anyway." I didn't answer. I walked past her and began methodically packing my suitcase. "You don't need these things anymore," she added with a smirk, holding up a pair of my heels. "You're just waitressing now, right?" I didn't correct her. She didn't know I'd lined up interviews at 3 design firms. She didn't care. "Where's my tablet?" I asked instead. "Walter next door bought it. His daughter's starting college. Dad got $1,000 for it." I nodded, trying to stay calm. That wasn't his to sell. Tessa rolled her eyes. "God, it's just a tablet." I paused at the doorway, my suitcase in hand. "No, Tessa, it was mine. And that's the part no one in this house ever understood." Then I walked downstairs, placed the folder neatly on the kitchen table, and left a note on top. Here's the truth. No more silence. No more sacrifices. Isla. As I stepped into the night and closed the door behind me, I didn't cry. I just breathed. For the first time in a long time, I felt the cold air on my face, and it didn't sting. It felt like clarity, like control, like the first page of a life that would finally belong to me. The next morning, I woke up to 27 missed calls and nearly 50 text messages. My phone buzzed so much it slid halfway off Camille's kitchen counter before I grabbed it. I didn't need to open anything. I knew exactly what had happened. They found the folder. Camille handed me a mug of black coffee, watching my face closely. "You okay?" I nodded, but the knot in my stomach was back. Sharp and twisting. I think I just started a war. I opened the messages one by one. The first was from Tessa. "What did you do?" "Mom's crying. Dad's freaking out. They're saying you're suing us?" Then one from my mom. "Isla Marie Harrington, you come home right now and explain yourself. This is slander. How could you turn on your own family?" A few messages later, her tone changed. "Please call us. We can talk about this. Your father is very upset. There's an explanation for all of this." And then the one that made my hands go cold, from my dad. "You ungrateful brat. After everything we've done for you, you want to paint us as criminals? If you pursue this ridiculous narrative, you'll regret it." But even he couldn't keep the anger going for long. By mid-morning, "Let's be reasonable, Isla. We can sort this out. I'm sure there's no need for lawyers." It was never about sorting things out. It was about control. And now that I had stepped outside of it, now that I had proof and the nerve to use it, they didn't know how to respond. What neither of them expected was who would respond next. At noon, I received a call from a number I hadn't saved but immediately recognized. "Isla, it's Grandma Margot." I blinked. Grandma Margot was my dad's mother. She had always been polite but distant, the kind of woman who preferred holiday cards and long silences over real involvement. Her voice, usually measured and formal, was shaky. "I saw your file. I had no idea it had gotten this bad." "You read it?" I asked, stunned. "Laura forwarded it to me this morning," she replied, referring to my aunt. "Your father lied to all of us, Isla, about the trust fund, about the finances, about everything." I didn't know what to say. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. "Your grandfather and I are flying in tomorrow," she continued. "Do not speak to your parents until we get there. We need to talk. All of us." After the call ended, I sat frozen, the phone still in my hand. Camille appeared in the doorway with a raised brow. "Was that Margot?" I nodded slowly. "She's coming." Camille leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "Well, I guess the truth isn't staying in that house anymore." That afternoon, I received another surprise. This time from Valerie, my manager at Bluestone Cafe. She called to check on me after I didn't show up for my shift. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately, but she stopped me. "Camille told me everything," Valerie said gently. Take the day off. Heck, take the week if you need. And listen, I've been where you are, Isla. If you ever need help, financially or otherwise, don't hesitate. I mean that. Her kindness nearly broke me. After years of transactional relationships at home, the idea of someone offering support with no strings attached felt unreal. And then, as if fate had one more twist to offer, Camille's doorbell rang. It was Jessica, a friend from my design studio class, holding a laptop case. "I heard what happened," she said, hugging me. "This is my old MacBook. It's not much, but it'll get you through thesis season." An hour later, Nathan from our typography class dropped by with groceries, and Melissa, Camille's neighbor, brought freezer meals and a USB full of design software. It hit me then. My blood family may have failed me, but my chosen family was showing up in every way that mattered. That night, as I sat cross-legged on Camille's living room floor, reviewing cloud backups on Jessica's old laptop, I heard the front door open. Camille stepped in, followed by someone unexpected. Aunt Laura. She looked exhausted but determined, holding a folder in her hands. "I went to your parents' house," she said. "It's chaos. Your father's screaming. Your mother's trying to call every relative to do damage control. And Tessa, well, Tessa's having a full-blown identity crisis." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Laura sat down beside me. "Apparently, finding out your parents have been lying to you for years and funding your life with stolen money is a little destabilizing." She opened the folder and pulled out a single document. "Tessa's tuition," she said, "already paid. 3 weeks ago. Not by your parents, but by the trust fund your grandfather set up. The same one they told you was gone." I stared at her, not breathing. "You were never supposed to be cut off, Isla," she said quietly. "The money was always there. They just took it." My world tilted sideways. But not from shock this time, from clarity. Because now it wasn't just about stolen money or broken promises. It was about deliberate deception. And it was time, finally, to bring all of it to light. The moment Aunt Laura handed me the document, proof that Tessa's tuition had already been paid by the trust fund, something inside me clicked. Not anger, not betrayal, just understanding. A grim, sharp-edged understanding. All this time, I thought my parents were just careless, maybe even manipulative out of desperation. But this wasn't survival. This was strategy. A calculated erasure of my rights, my independence, my future. They hadn't just ignored me. They'd stolen from me while making me feel like I owed them. "They told me the fund was gone," I whispered, my voice thin in the quiet living room. "They said the market crashed, that I needed to learn responsibility." Laura's jaw tightened. "They drained your portion slowly over the last 5 years. You didn't notice because you never had access. Your father convinced the trustees that you were too financially unstable to manage the account yourself." I actually laughed. Not out of humor, but because the absurdity of it all hit me like a punch. I was the one working 2 jobs, the one paying bills, the one putting off everything from vacations to decent shoes just to stay out of debt. Unstable? No. I was inconvenient. I was the one who didn't make them look good, who didn't ask for favors, who didn't need rescuing. So they buried me under silence and called it parenting. They used my trust to pay Tessa's tuition after hers ran out? I asked, still trying to piece it together. Laura nodded. "Your grandfather had set up equal funds for both of you, enough to cover undergraduate and graduate education. But Tessa failed out of 2 programs before your portion even started being touched. They emptied hers, then dipped into yours without telling you. And the tablet, I added, unable to let it go. Gone, she said quietly. Sold to the neighbor. Walter's daughter started at BU last month. Camille, who'd been silently sitting across from us, broke the silence. So they rewarded Tessa again, with Isla's money. Again. It wasn't jealousy I felt, not even rivalry. It was exhaustion. That kind of deep, bone-level exhaustion you only feel when you've been carrying weight that was never meant to be yours, and you finally set it down. I didn't speak for a long moment. I just looked down at the document, the ink smudged slightly where Aunt Laura's fingers had gripped it too tightly. I need to see Tessa, I said finally. Laura raised an eyebrow. You sure? I don't want to fight, I said. I just need to know what she knew and what she didn't. It was the following evening when Tessa showed up at Camille's apartment. I didn't invite her. I hadn't texted or called, but I wasn't surprised. Camille opened the door and stepped aside wordlessly as Tessa walked in, holding a small paper bag and a nervous energy I barely recognized. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded and led her into the kitchen. We sat across from each other at the table, the same table where just a night before I had learned the truth about the trust fund. She looked different, hair pulled back, no makeup, no performance. Just a girl who had lost something and didn't know how to name it. I didn't know, she said quietly, about the money, the trust, any of it. I watched her carefully. What did you know? She swallowed. I knew they favored me. I knew you were always the one who gave in, who worked, who sacrificed. But I didn't think they were stealing from you. I nodded slowly. You thought I chose this. She flinched. They told me you liked it, that you were practical, that you wanted to be independent. I looked down at the table. They made me think you looked down on me, Tessa added, her voice cracking, that you resented me for being the creative one, the one with potential. That one caught me off guard. I raised my eyes to meet hers. I never resented you, Tessa, I said. I resented them for pitting us against each other, for treating my boundaries like obstacles and your needs like gospel. She pulled a white envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. Inside was $1,000 in cash. I sold the car, she said. I'm staying with a friend until I can figure things out. That money's yours for the tablet, for what I took without knowing. I didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, I said, Why are you really here? Tessa looked up, eyes red. Because for the first time in my life, I'm seeing our family clearly. And it's terrifying, and because I'm sorry, and because I don't want to be their pawn anymore. I believed her, not because her words were perfect, they weren't, but because for the first time they sounded like hers. There was a knock at the door. Camille peeked out the window and frowned. Your parents, she said. Both of them. Tessa's face went pale. I didn't tell them I was here. I swear. I stood up slowly. They're not coming in, I said, voice steady, not until they start treating me like a person, not a resource. Camille nodded and opened the door just enough to step outside. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the rising voices through the wall. But I didn't feel panic this time. I felt something else. Power. Because they could scream and demand and twist stories all they wanted. But this time, I had the truth. And I wasn't letting go. The shouting outside wasn't unexpected. My father had always been a man of volume, someone who believed the loudest voice in the room was automatically the most correct. But this time, there was a wall between us. A literal one. And metaphorical, too. Camille stood outside in the hallway, her voice low and firm. I couldn't hear her words clearly, but I caught fragments of my father's rage bleeding through the door. She's manipulating everyone. That folder is full of exaggerations. We raised her, and this is how she repays us? My mother's voice followed, softer, but no less rehearsed. We're just trying to talk to her. This isn't necessary. This is family. Family. They loved that word. They used it like a shield, as if saying family erased responsibility, erased theft, erased years of neglect and emotional gaslighting. Tessa sat silently at the kitchen table, her shoulders rigid, hands clenched in her lap. They won't stop, she said quietly. Not until they think they've regained control. I nodded. But they won't get it. Not this time. Aunt Laura had taught me a lot over the past 48 hours. About trust law, about boundaries, about how to preserve dignity, even while picking up the pieces of your past. But the most valuable lesson she left me with? Silence is not the same as peace, and obedience is not the same as love. The pounding on the door grew more urgent. Camille opened it slightly again and said something. I caught the words trespassing and police, and then the silence that followed was deafening. Moments later, I heard tires screech and then a car pulling away. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding slowly left my body. Tessa looked up at me. They've never left when I said stop, she whispered. They never listened to no, I replied, until they were finally forced to. We sat in that quiet for a long moment, the tension slowly melting into something more honest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but awareness. And then, as if the universe was determined to keep the day from ending in calm, Camille's doorbell rang again. This time it was a man in a dark gray suit, holding a slim leather briefcase. Tessa froze. That's Grandma's lawyer. He introduced himself politely, handed me a sealed envelope, and nodded before turning to leave. Inside was a formal court notice, an emergency hearing regarding the misappropriation of funds from the Harrington Family Trust. My presence was requested. So were my parents. It was signed, filed, and official. For a long time, I just stared at the letter. Not because I didn't understand. I did. But because this meant there was no more pretending. No more, we'll talk it out, or let's just move on. There would be documents, evidence, questions under oath. The truth wasn't just something I'd written down anymore. It was about to become public record. The next morning, I met with Grandma Margot in her hotel suite. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just quieter. As if disappointment had taken up residence in her posture. She didn't greet me with warmth or scolding. She simply said, "Sit." I did. "I should have looked closer," she said after a while. "I thought your father was strict, not deceptive. I thought your mother was overwhelmed, not complicit." I didn't say anything. It wasn't the time for comfort. She reached for a thick binder on the table and slid it toward me. "I'm taking over as trustee of both your and Tessa's funds," she said. "A third-party firm will manage it moving forward. Neither your father nor your mother will have access again." My throat closed, but I nodded. "I've also arranged legal counsel for you," she continued, "in case they try anything further." "Why?" I asked. "After all this?" She looked at me with a rare softness. "Because I failed your father once," she said, "and I won't fail you." That evening, back at Camille's apartment, Tessa was packing her things. She didn't say where she was going, just that she needed time. I understood. Before she left, she turned to me and said, "I didn't ask to be the golden child, but I benefited from it. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I do want to try. Someday. She left the envelope of cash on the counter. I didn't touch it. Instead, I walked over and hugged her. It wasn't long. It wasn't cinematic. But it was real. And for the first time, it felt like maybe we weren't just escaping the same house. Maybe we were finally, painfully, beginning to rebuild something better. The day of the court hearing arrived gray and heavy, as if the sky itself carried the weight of what was about to unfold. I wore the blazer that Tessa had once tried on in front of my mirror, back when she assumed my closet was just another resource she was entitled to. Funny how something as small as a jacket could symbolize so much. Ownership, boundary, voice. Camille offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to walk in alone. Not because I wasn't scared. I was. But because there was something important about facing this chapter on my own 2 feet. Inside the courthouse, the air was cold and sterile, but my hands weren't shaking. Not this time. My parents arrived 15 minutes late. My mother looked like she'd been crying. My father looked like he was ready to argue with a brick wall. Neither of them acknowledged me. Tessa sat in the row behind me, quiet, present. She didn't owe me anything, but she came. And that meant something. The hearing wasn't dramatic. There were no yelling matches or grand gestures, just numbers, statements, paper trails. The judge listened as the lawyer my grandmother had hired walked through the financial documents line by line, unauthorized withdrawals, misused trust fund assets, falsified justifications. At one point, my father interrupted to say, "We were doing what was best for the family." The judge didn't even blink. "That may be your belief, sir, but intent does not negate fiduciary responsibility. You were not authorized to use these funds." My mother shifted uncomfortably beside him. For the first time in years, she didn't try to smooth things over. She said nothing. The judge ruled in our favor. My parents were formally removed from any financial authority regarding both my trust and Tessa's. They were ordered to repay a portion of what had been taken, with the rest permanently revoked from their access. All oversight would be handled by a third-party financial firm. And just like that, the grip they'd held for decades slipped. Not with a bang, but with a signature. Afterward, in the hallway, my father glared at me. "You've embarrassed this family." I looked him in the eye for the first time in months. "No, I exposed the truth. You did the rest." He turned and walked away. My mother lingered. "I never wanted things to turn out like this," she whispered. "You had so many chances to stop it." I replied. "You chose silence." And for once, she didn't deny it. A week later, I signed a lease on a small apartment in the South End, a bright corner unit with creaky floors and windows that let in too much noise from the street below. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My grandmother insisted on helping with the deposit, not out of guilt, she said, but because family should show up when it counts. The difference was, this time I believed her. My job hunt also turned a corner. One of Valerie's friends, a project manager at a local architecture firm, had seen my portfolio. I got called in for an interview, and instead of pretending everything in my life had been perfect, I told a measured version of the truth. They didn't flinch. In fact, the creative director said, "Anyone who can survive that and still show up with this level of work, that's someone I want on my team." I got the job. Not an internship, not an assistant position, a full junior designer role with real responsibilities and enough pay to breathe. Tessa texted me a few days later from her dorm at the community college. She'd enrolled in early education courses and was working part-time at a local daycare. Started a unit on child development today, she wrote. Didn't realize how much of our own stuff we carry into adulthood. I think I'm still unpacking mine. I replied with a simple, same. We weren't close again. Not yet. But we weren't strangers anymore either. Sometimes healing doesn't come with grand apologies or cinematic reunions. Sometimes it's quiet and slow, like a wound scabbing over, one layer at a time. One Friday evening, I hosted a small dinner in my new apartment. Camille brought wine and sarcastic toast speeches. Jessica brought her infamous lemon bars. Valerie stopped by after work with flowers and news about a new project she wanted to recommend me for. And Grandma Margot? She came last, dressed in slacks and a cashmere sweater, holding a small, wrapped box. Inside was a vintage drafting compass set, my grandfather's. He believed in structure and second chances, she said, placing it in my hand. Both of which you now have. As the laughter rose around the dinner table, I looked around and realized something important. I had lost a version of my family. But I hadn't lost family. I was building a new one, chosen, deliberate, honest. And in that moment, I wasn't the girl with the missing tablet or the vanished tuition. I was Isla Harrington. Designer, survivor, storyteller of her own life. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was free. I hadn't planned to go back to my childhood house. Not ever, if I could help it. But 3 weeks after the court ruling, an envelope arrived at my apartment, postmarked in my father's handwriting. Inside was a short note, stiff, written in block letters, and a house key taped to the bottom corner. You still have some of your grandmother's things in the attic. Come get them before we clean the space. No apology, no warmth, just logistics. I wasn't sure why I said yes. Maybe because closure sometimes doesn't knock. Sometimes you have to walk back through the door yourself. Camille offered to come, but I declined. I didn't want anyone buffering the discomfort for me. Not this time. The house looked the same from the outside. Pale blue siding, white-trimmed windows, and the front porch railing still half repaired from a storm 3 years ago. But the moment I stepped inside, the silence felt different. Heavier. The air no longer carried that forced sense of authority that used to dominate every room. It just felt hollow. I moved quietly, past the kitchen table, where so many arguments had started under the guise of family discussions, and up the stairs toward the attic hatch. The wooden ladder creaked as I climbed. A few dusty boxes with my name scrawled in faded Sharpie sat near the back wall, under a low window pane that filtered in weak sunlight. I found my grandmother's photo albums, a patchwork quilt she'd sewn the summer before I started college, and a stack of books she'd kept in her old den. I wrapped them in the blanket and turned to leave. But then I saw it. My old vision board. It was just a piece of corkboard tacked with magazine clippings, sketches, fabric swatches, and little affirmations like "make space for yourself" and "design from within." I had made it during my junior year of high school when no one in the house had taken my dreams seriously. I almost left it. But then I realized it was a piece of who I used to be before I learned to armor myself with silence and survival. So I took it with me. As I stepped into the hallway, I found Tessa standing by the doorway to my old bedroom. Her arms were crossed, not defensively, but uncertain. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "I didn't think you'd be here," I replied. She shrugged. "Dad left earlier. Mom's at her book club." I nodded. We stood in silence for a beat before she spoke again. "I found your sketchbooks, the ones you use to keep under your bed." My chest tightened slightly. And they were amazing," she said. I never knew how much you created while pretending not to want attention. That stopped me. She looked at the rolled up blanket in my arms. What are you taking? Just some of Grandma's things, I replied. A few pieces of my own. She hesitated, then added, I've been going to counseling on campus. There's this therapist who works with students who grew up in complicated families. I tilted my head slightly. How's that going? She offered a small smile. I've cried in her office 4 times already, and I'm only on session 6. So, I guess it's working. I almost laughed. That sounds about right. There was a long pause. Then she said it. I'm really sorry, Isla, for everything I overlooked, for everything I let happen just because it was easier. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't see the golden child. I didn't see the person who got everything I was denied. I saw a girl, a young woman, unraveling the same patterns I had fought so hard to escape. I believe you, I said quietly. Tessa nodded. I'm trying to build something different. For myself. I don't know what that looks like yet. But I want it to be real. You'll get there, I told her. Just don't rush the undoing. She walked with me to the door. As I stepped out onto the porch, she called after me. You still designing dream spaces? I turned, a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Yeah, but now I build them in real life too. Back at the apartment, I unwrapped the quilt and spread it across the end of my bed. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books. I pinned my vision board above my desk, right beside a newer one. Bolder, messier, unfinished. Maybe that was the point. We carry our past not to live in it, but to recognize how far we've come from it. The next morning, I hung a small wooden plaque outside my apartment door, a gift from Camille. It read, You don't have to go home if you build your own. And for the first time, I believed I had. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Not the tense silence I used to associate with the house I grew up in, where silence meant someone was mad and you were expected to figure out why. No, this was the kind of quiet that came with space. Breathing room. Healing. I settled into a rhythm in the new apartment. Mornings began with sunlight spilling across my desk, where I'd sit with coffee and review design layouts. Afternoons were spent at the studio, collaborating with my new team on a boutique hotel renovation in the Berkshires. Evenings, I'd walk home through the South End, sometimes stopping for flowers at the corner market, or for tea at the bookstore cafe around the block. There was still work to be done. Not just the professional kind, but the kind that comes from inside. The quiet, private work of unlearning, of relearning. One night, after wrapping up a late client presentation, I came home to find a package waiting at my door. There was no return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly. Inside was my tablet, the one my father had sold, and a note. Walter's daughter returned it. Said it never felt right having something that clearly wasn't hers. I reimbursed him. It's yours again. Use it for something only you could create. Grandma Margot. I sat on the floor of my living room, tablet in my lap, and just stared at it. It wasn't about the object itself. It was what it represented. Everything they had taken, control, opportunity, choice, was slowly being returned to me. Not through their kindness, but through my own insistence. That night, I reopened an old design file I'd nearly abandoned, a personal project for a community art space designed to host local exhibitions and creative workshops. I'd shelved it months ago, telling myself it was too ambitious. Now I wasn't so sure. Tessa and I began texting more regularly, casual at first. Articles about interior design trends, Photos of her classroom setup at the daycare center she was training at. Memes that poked fun at family dysfunction in a way that made us both laugh, but also quietly acknowledge how much truth lived beneath the humor. Then one weekend, she asked if she could visit. We agreed on Saturday afternoon. Camille insisted on baking cookies for the occasion, just in case the sugar helps soften the emotional landmines. I appreciated the gesture, even if I wasn't sure we'd need it. Tessa arrived with a tote bag full of used children's books from her latest thrifting spree and a bouquet of sunflowers. "I didn't know what to bring," she said, placing them on my counter. "But these felt like you." I blinked. "Why?" She shrugged. "They grow toward the light, even in bad weather." We ate cookies, talked about school, avoided heavy topics until Tessa paused mid-sentence, her voice quieter. "Have you heard from them?" I didn't have to ask who she meant. "No," I said, "just that letter with the house key." "Nothing since." She nodded. "They keep calling me, Ling, mostly about money, or asking if I've talked sense into you." I rolled my eyes. "Classic." "They don't really ask how I'm doing," she added. "Just if I'm keeping you grounded, like I'm supposed to reel you back in." I sighed. "They haven't figured out that I'm not coming back to that version of family." "Neither am I," she said softly. There was a beat of silence. Then she pulled a folded sheet of paper from her tote and handed it to me. It was a scanned copy of a letter she had written for one of her counseling assignments. It was addressed to "the version of me that let it all happen." I read it slowly. In it, she apologized. Not to me directly, but to the part of herself that stayed quiet out of comfort, who let things slide because it was easier, who believed that if someone was sacrificing silently, that was their choice, not their survival strategy. It was one of the most honest things I'd ever read. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said when I looked up. "But I'm trying, I really am." I folded the letter gently and tucked it into the side pocket of my sketchbook. "I know," I said. "We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some repairs are loud, dramatic, tearful. Ours was quiet. One sunflower at a time." That night, as I sat by the window sketching designs for the art space, I realized something. This was no longer a story about escape. It was a story about reclamation, of space, of voice, of relationships that were no longer dictated by guilt or obligation, but chosen carefully, like materials in a design. Some people build empires. Some build fences. Me? I was learning to build bridges, only where they could hold the weight of truth. And this time, I wasn't drawing for approval. I was drawing for freedom. A month later, the first frost of winter blanketed the city. My apartment windows fogged with condensation each morning, and I found myself falling into a routine that felt steady, familiar, mine. I didn't check my parents' social media anymore. I no longer flinched when an unknown number rang. I wasn't waiting for an apology because I'd stopped needing one. And yet, the story wasn't finished. The community art space I'd quietly dreamed about, the one I'd called the Commons in my old sketchbook, was slowly becoming real. After I shared my design proposal with Valerie's network, one of her longtime clients, a nonprofit director named Sylvia Kane, asked to meet. She ran a community foundation focused on youth education and neighborhood revitalization. And when I showed her my concept plans, she leaned back and smiled. "You built this like someone who understands what it means to not be given space," she said. I nodded. "I designed it for the kid I used to be, and the ones still waiting to be heard." 2 weeks later, they secured a grant. I was hired as the project's lead designer. I cried in Camille's living room the night I got the call. Not from shock, not from fear, but from something new. Something I was still learning to name. Enough. Not more, not performance, not perfection. Just enough. Around that same time, Tessa invited me to her campus art showcase. I hesitated at first. Crowds weren't exactly my thing, and I didn't know what I'd be walking into. But she'd been slowly, consistently showing up. So I showed up for her. The exhibit was simple: handmade educational tools, murals by children she worked with, and a section labeled Learning Through Empathy. That's where I saw it. A series of hand-drawn panels in soft watercolor, two sisters, one always slightly in the background, holding broken pieces while the other ran ahead. Then, slowly across each panel, the roles shift. The younger one turning around, reaching back, helping the other stand taller. There were no names, no direct reference, but I knew what it was. As I stood staring, someone walked up beside me. "She didn't think you'd come," Sylvia said. She'd apparently been invited too. "But she hoped." I nodded. "I'm glad I did." Later that night, Tessa and I sat on a campus bench, huddled in oversized scarves and paper coffee cups. "She found the letter you left," she said quietly. It took me a moment to realize she meant the folder, the one I had left on the kitchen table months ago. "Mom?" I asked. Tessa nodded. She read all of it, and she cried. Not publicly, but she cried. I wasn't sure what to feel. "She asked about you last week," Tessa added. "Wanted to know if you were okay. Said she misses the girls we used to be." I looked up at the stars. They seemed softer somehow in the cold. "I miss the girl I used to be," I said, "but I like the one I'm becoming more." Tessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "She's not the same, you know," she said. "Since the hearing, since we left. But I don't think she knows how to change. Not really." I didn't say anything, because some truths don't need an answer. They just need time. Before we left, Tessa handed me a small envelope. Inside was a $2,000 check. From her savings, she said, not our parents'. "It's not about repayment," she told me. "It's about realignment." I didn't cash it. I folded it, placed it in the back of my sketchbook, and wrote on the envelope, "Not a debt, a shift." The following week, I stood before a group of city stakeholders, presenting the final design draft of the Commons. I walked them through every room: the multi-purpose studio space, the gallery wall for student art, the reading nook with secondhand couches and patchwork pillows. At the end of the presentation, one of the donors asked, "Why this project? Why now?" I paused. Then I said, "Because some kids grow up in houses full of people, but never feel seen. Some grow up being told their dreams are impractical, that they're too much, or not enough. This space, it's for them. A place where quiet resilience isn't overlooked, where design meets dignity." The room went still. Then they applauded. Not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that means we see it, we feel it, we believe in it. And I walked out of that room with something stronger than validation. A foundation. Not the kind built of brick or glass, but one made of lessons, boundaries, reclaimed voice. The kind that says, "I am not what they expected me to be. I am what I chose to become." 1 year later, I turned 24. There was no dramatic party, no fancy dinner, no carefully curated social media post, just a small gathering at the Commons, the very community space I once sketched in the margins of my notebook, now standing tall, with wide windows, splattered paintbrushes, and laughter echoing off the walls. Camille brought carrot cake. Grandma Margot arrived with a stack of vintage architecture books tied with twine. Tessa came straight from her student teaching shift, cheeks flushed from a playground game of freeze tag. And I stood in the center of the space I had designed, surrounded by the people who didn't just show up for the milestones, but had walked beside me through the messy in-between. At one point in the evening, Valerie raised her glass and said, "To Isla, for showing us all what it means to rebuild from the inside out." I smiled, not just at the words, but because this time I could accept them without shrinking. Later that night, after everyone had left and the building had gone quiet, I sat alone on the cushioned bench by the west window, watching the last snow of the season drift outside. My old tablet rested beside me, and in my lap was a notebook with a single sentence scribbled at the top. Sometimes the people who raised you can't see who you've become until you stop letting them define who you are. I used to think healing meant fixing everything, that justice meant an apology, that closure had to come from the same door that caused the wound. But I've learned something far quieter and far more powerful. Sometimes, healing is choosing not to return to the place that broke you. Sometimes justice is living well without their permission, and closure? It comes the moment you stop waiting for someone to set you free, and you do it yourself. To anyone listening who's ever been the responsible one, the background support system, the fixer, the forgiver, the one who gave until there was nothing left, you are not selfish for saying enough. You are not wrong for building a life that feels like peace instead of performance. And no, you do not owe anyone your silence just because they call it love. Your voice matters. Your boundaries are valid, and the future you imagine for yourself, it's not too much. It's exactly right. Thank you for walking this journey with me, through the mess, the grief, the growth, and finally, the rebuild. If this story reminded you of your own, I hope you feel seen. And if you're still somewhere in the middle of it, I hope you know you're not alone. The ending isn't written yet, and you get to hold the pen. Until next time, this is Isla. Not the girl who stayed quiet, but the woman who finally learned how to speak. Take care, be kind to yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.